And we are recording. Some of you asked for the recording for afterward. We are going to send out at least Patrick's, if not Ilona's. It's kind of a package deal, so you're going to get both slides, so you can refer to those afterward. And so hopefully everyone knows, if you don't want to be recorded, you have a couple of options. You can simply, as Dab is doing, not start your video, but you're still going to be recorded, but the video won't be there. Or we don't want this, of course, you can leave, but we would like you to stick around. So those are the two options that I know about. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So again, welcome to everybody. As I think, because we did a trial run, so to speak, last week, we have Patrick Oden, and we have Ilona de Borhegyi, and they're going to be talking about expat taxation challenges. And right off the bat, we'll say that there are some unique taxation issues that we all face as folks living abroad, U.S. citizens technically living abroad. We'll talk about various aspects of those tax issues, and then Ilona will talk about tax fairness and what Democrats Abroad does. We do a lot. So before we jump into it and I turn it over to Patrick, I want to say thank you all again, all of you again, for attending, and especially for your patience with our technical issues last week. So really appreciate it. So just a really quick, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but really quick. Patrick is, so in terms of our speaker, Patrick is our Lakeside Tax Service representative extraordinaire. A lot of folks here in the area work with him and his company, and he specializes in abroad folks, so US and Canadian citizens in particular who are in Mexico. And Ilona has so many accomplishments within and without Democrats Abroad. I can't list them all, but I can tell you she is probably the person that has spent more time with Democrats Abroad than anyone else that I could possibly ever hope to know, both here in Mexico as well as Italy. And she spent a ton of time on the Taxation tax force, which is global. And she has a lot of good insights into what we're doing, both from a legislative standpoint and other standpoints, to try and get as much fairness for all of us as possible. So with that, let me turn it over to Patrick, and he's going to talk to you about US taxpayers living abroad and what you should know. So I'm going to stop sharing, Patrick, and if you can pick it up.
Okay, sure.
That'd be great.
Okay.
There we go.
Great. So first of all, thank you for joining today. And like Terry said, my name is Patrick Oden, and I operate Lakeside Tax Service. We're based in San Antonio, Tlayacapan, which is just down from Ajijic, for those of you who may not be familiar with this area. Just a moment, let's see. Okay, so there are a couple of us that work here. We have some administrative staff. We have Ray Hickey, who is an enrolled agent, Carla Dedoff, and myself, and I'm a certified acceptance agent for the IRS. We've been here in business for 10 years, and we have approximately 75 years of tax experience between us. And my apologies for this camera problem today. Just a moment.
The good news is, at least for me, I'm not seeing an issue with the actual PowerPoint slides. So.
Okay, great. Okay, so what I want you to take away today is to know your obligations when living abroad. Don't be afraid of foreign issues. If you have questions, seek professional help before making decisions, especially if you're unsure. And if you look at your passport, the last page on some of the passports now say all US citizens working and residing abroad are required to file and report on their worldwide income. Now, if you don't have a filing requirement, the fact that you live abroad does not require you to file. So if you were living in the US, you would not be required to file there because maybe your income was too low or you didn't have certain types of taxable income. You're not required to file just because you live abroad. But if you have taxable income and you have a filing requirement and you live abroad, then you you have not only the regular obligations, but you have other obligations as well. So a lot of people are really proud of the fact that they live in Mexico and they want to put their Mexican address on their tax return. That's not a really good option because the IRS really doesn't want to know where you live. They want to know where you can get a letter. So if you can more quickly and effectively get a letter at a US address, we highly recommend that you put on the front of your 1040 your US mailing address. When the IRS does want to know, because there are some specific instances, such as the foreign earned exclusion, that you would need to tell them where you lived, or if you have wages that are from a foreign employer, they would want to know your address, where you lived while you were making those wages. We suggest using care when using addresses in California, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and New York. Those are some of the states that do the most investigation of people who have filed a U.S. tax return at the federal level, but not filed one at the local level. And if you're using one of those addresses, you may want to file a non-resident tax return just to make it clear that you're not living in the state. And another thing you can do to make it clear that you're not living there is to use in care of names. So let's talk a little bit about tax residency and how this comes into play. We look at the facts when we're looking at residency, and this is not necessarily your immigration card. If the IRS were to ask about your residency, there would be a number of questions that they may ask. And that would be if you've rented a home or if you've purchased a home, where do you have bank accounts? Where do you have most of your social contacts? All of these things go into the establishing residency, even abroad. If you're a resident of Mexico, you may qualify to exclude up to 112,000 or 120,000, depending on the year, of earned income. Now, this is income that is earned when you're working abroad, but not necessarily from a foreign source. Another thing when it comes to residency, you may be a part-year resident, and you may not be a resident of any U.S. state. This is a little bit hard for people to believe because they say, well, I need to establish residency in Florida, or I need to establish residency in Texas because that's a state that doesn't have any tax. But actually, you may not be a resident of any state. And then I've heard people trying to scare people into saying, you know, if you declare that Mexico is your residency, then you're going to have to pay taxes on your Social Security and your other income. Do not be afraid of that, because Social Security and pensions are protected from taxation in Mexico by the tax treaty. So when you're moving to Mexico, if you move during the middle of the year, you may need to file as a part-year resident, indicating that you lived in the state for part of the year and you lived outside of the state for the rest of the year. After, in the following year, then you would have no state tax filing requirement. The exception to that would be if you have income that is based in the States. So for example, let's say you move here from Michigan and you decide to rent your house in Michigan. You would still file a non-resident tax return because you have income that is sourced from the state of Michigan. This does not apply when the income is coming from a pension. So let's say in this case, Michigan, we're paying you a state pension. That would not be considered sourced in Michigan. It's only things that come from such as partnerships or property that's located within the state. Some of the traps when it comes to residency is driver's license renewals. There's nothing that says that you need to cancel your driver's license when you leave a state, but if you're declaring non-residency and later you decide to renew your license, then the state can come back and challenge your residency because you now have a license in the state and you've renewed it after moving out. Some states, especially some of the northern states, even count hunting license among those things that could indicate residency. And in any case, if you are 183 days or more during the year in any state, that constitutes physical presence constitutes residency for the state. One thing to be aware of is that your voting address alone does not constitute residency. So you can still vote in the state where you moved from, and that does not constitute residency. So let's talk about the foreign income exclusion, because this is a real bonus for people who are working abroad, and it allows you to exclude earned income from federal taxation. In 2022, the limit for this exclusion was 112,000. In 2023, it's indexed for inflation. It goes up to 120,000. This applies to people who are self-employed or who are working as an employee, even for a U.S. company. And what really matters when it comes down to this is, where is the work being performed? So if you're maybe telecommuting, or if you're doing home office from Mexico, that work is considered as being performed in Mexico, and you would be able to exclude that income from U.S. taxation. Active rental real estate is for people who are real estate agents, who are not considered, their income is not considered passive. It's considered as active. That could be excluded as well. And if you have an S Corp, then you would need to talk to an accountant about salary considerations for an S Corp, because when you're paying yourself a salary from a corporation, the salary can be excluded, but any dividends or any capital distributions from the corporation would not be considered foreign income. And so the decision on how much you pay yourself as a salary could be affected by your ability to exclude that from taxation. One note about the Social Security tax, it's also known as the self-employment tax. There is no exclusion, and no foreign taxes can offset any Social Security taxes that you owe. Social Security tax is 15.3% on the first $160,200 of earned income. The only way to reduce Social Security taxes is through an S Corp type structure. And basically, the U.S. wants to make sure that you don't move back to the U.S. and not have Social Security if you've been working for yourself abroad. When it comes to foreign rentals, this is an issue that we often have a lot of questions around. People say, do I have to include this rental income in my income if it was abroad? And the answer for U.S. citizens and legal residents is yes, that has to be included as income, but all expenses can be deducted just as if they were expenses in the U.S. One of the primary changes when it's a foreign property is that we use the alternative depreciation system, and this depreciates a residential structure over 30 years versus the 27.5 years that it would be depreciated if it were within the United States. Rentals can be used up for 14 days for vacation use or your personal use, and if the personal use is for 14 days or less, you're not required to prorate any of the expenses. Also, if you're staying in your apartment or villa or beachside condo for days in order to repair or improve the property, you would not count those days as personal use. So you could certainly stay in your own property for more than 14 days per year with no proration, as long as those days were necessary for repairing or improving the property. And one thing I want to mention is the 1031 exchange. If you've never heard of that, the 1031 exchange is designed to let people sell one property, buy another property without realizing a capital gain. Essentially, it defers the taxes on the capital gain. A 1031 exchange is only allowed if it's a U.S. property to another U.S.
You got it, Jerry?
or a foreign property to a foreign property. What you cannot do with a 1031 exchange is to exchange a U.S. property for a foreign property. However, going back to this, if you had a rental property in Mexico, you decide that you want to relocate to Ecuador and you want to now sell your properties in Mexico, buy in Ecuador, you could do that. It doesn't have to be the same country, just as long as it's outside of the United States. So I want to say a little bit about the Mexican taxes and the SAT, which is the IRS of Mexico. First of all, Mexico has been very lenient with foreigners. So far, I have had no audits of any clients from SAT. Substantial investment income that's derived from Mexican sources may obligate you to file a Mexican tax return. And that is despite the withholding that you have on your sources of income in Mexico, such as interest or dividends. Local rentals are subject to Mexican tax. So if you had a rental and you're reporting correctly, you would be reporting that to Mexico as a rental and reporting it in the US. What I am seeing is that many people have rentals in Mexico and they don't want to get involved in the Mexican tax system. They report it to the US and hope everything goes well. To date, it has been, but I hear that there's some movement that Mexico is making some changes to try to get the tax from rentals. As I said before, the tax treaty, and I'm sorry for the misspelling there, but the tax treaty does protect your Social Security and your pensions. And I would also mention that a pension could be construed to be an IRA or a Roth IRA, because that would be based on monies that were earned while you were working in the United States. And one thing you should be careful about in Mexico is to not ask a local accountant to help you avoid Mexican taxes. They're a little bit under the gun when it comes to SAT. They don't want to lose their license, and so they want to be very careful about the income they report, because they're held to a really high standard by SAT. And so you shouldn't be asking them to help you hide Mexican income if you're subject to Mexican income tax on your earnings within the country. Let's move on to the foreign account report, and this is now known as the FinCEN 114. It was formerly known as the FBAR. The FinCEN 114 does not require you to file a tax return. So if you have a foreign account and you are filing a tax return, you should check that you do have a foreign account, but it's not reportable on the Schedule B. If you don't, or if you're not required to file a tax return, the fact that you have a foreign account under $10,000 does not obligate you to file a return nor an FBAR. So the FinCEN 114 or FBAR only needs to be filed when the aggregate value of all non-US bank accounts exceeds $10,000 during any time during the year. The report is due on April 15th with an automatic extension until October 15th, and there's no form to file for that extension. This also applies to fiduciary accounts. Now, those accounts are reported separately, but let's say that you're a member of a church or a temple or a club or a charity, and this charity has foreign accounts that have gone over $10,000 during the year. Then those accounts would need to be reported on your personal FBAR or FinCEN 114, and it would be reported as a third-party account to which you have signature power over. One thing, if you're a member of a club or charity and you are a board member, you should make sure that all of the US citizen board members are reporting that on their FinCEN 114. And that's to protect the charity more than anything. Another form that many people have to file is a statement of specified foreign assets, the 8938. The limits on this are different because for a single person, you would need to have over $200,000 of liquid assets on the last day of the year, or $300,000 at any time during the year. And those limits are doubled for a couple that is married filing jointly. The one big difference is that included in the limits for this are not only bank accounts and brokerage accounts, but it can also include the value of life insurance. What it does not include is the value of real property, such as houses or cars or rental property would not be included in this report. This report is due April 15th or October 15th if you file an extension for your tax return. And for those living abroad, that you would have an automatic extension until June the 15th. So let's talk a little bit about foreign corporations, because this is something I see very, very often. And sometimes people have gotten into this situation really through no fault of their own. A friend or relative would come to them that lives in Mexico and say, you know, I really want you to be my business partner. We're going to form a corporation in Mexico, and you're going to own 20% of that, and we'll have other investors, which may be Mexican or from another country. But you as a US citizen have a responsibility to report your ownership and your control of that foreign corporation once it reaches 20%. This report is due with your tax return either on April 15th or October 15th. And there's a penalty of $10,000 for failure to file. It's a rather complicated form because it requires us to put the income statement and the profit and the profit and loss, and the balance sheet has to go onto your tax return for this foreign corporation. It's unlikely that you would owe any additional taxes if it's a Mexican corporation, because taxes in Mexico tend to be higher than in the US. And many times what I face is people come to me and they say, I have a foreign corporation, but I've owned it for 3 or 4 years now, and I've never made this report. And unfortunately, if by filing this, if the penalty is assessed, we can only really go back 1 year to get amnesty on that $10,000 failure to file penalty. This is one of the penalties that I have seen that is really being imposed by the IRS for failure to file when you have a foreign corporation. Some of the opportunities when it comes to living abroad and doing your taxes is that you don't pay unnecessary state taxes. This can be a real savings if you're coming from a high tax state. You should always use the foreign earned income exclusion that we talked about previously if you're working abroad. You should always claim the foreign tax credit. And this can be claimed even on interest that you're receiving from Mexico. So if you have a bank account and you're having to report interest that say that you earned from, BBVA in Mexico on your US tax return, there probably will have been withholding for the Mexican government. And this can be claimed on your US tax return so that it offsets the tax that would be imposed on that interest. It's not a perfect formula, but it does, and much of that depends on how much of your income is based in the US and how much in a foreign country. But it does, the purpose of this is to tax income that is not taxed by another country and to not double tax that income. As far as the child tax credit, you can still claim the child tax credit if you're living abroad. Foreign income is, for the child tax credit, for those of you who don't know, this is a tax credit for children that are 16 years of age or younger. And it does require you to have earned income. If a person is working in Mexico, the income from Mexico can be considered earned income to qualify the person for the child tax credit. However, a person who is eligible to receive the child tax credit should use the foreign tax credit and not the exclusion. Because if you exclude your income, then the government does not offer you the child tax credit. If you're married to a foreign spouse, you as a U.S. taxpayer have the right to declare jointly with your foreign spouse. And in order to do this, your spouse needs an ITIN number, which is an individual tax identification number. This allows you to double the exclusion from approximately 12,500 to 24,000 by having your spouse and declaring jointly, but you would need to declare the income for both of the spouses. Many times what I see is people who have a Mexican spouse, the spouse will be earning less, and therefore it's very beneficial for them to declare jointly. If you need an ITIN, this is especially something we can help you with as an acceptance agent can verify the documents so that you are not required to send original documents to the IRS, therefore risking that they would lose those documents either within the IRS or that they would be lost in the mail. One trap you should avoid, and I see this over and over, but people they want to have investments in Mexico because of times they're very advantageous. However, purchasing mutual funds in Mexico runs afoul of the PFIC rules. And this is passive foreign investment corporation rules. Essentially, you're in an investment where you cannot be sure that the income that you're reporting is correct according to US accounting principles. And therefore you risk being unable to correctly report your income. In this case, I suggest instead of purchasing a mutual fund, if you want to invest in stocks, that you should invest in directly through a brokerage house in shares of a stock or stocks rather than a mutual fund. And one thing to keep in mind is you may want to consider all of your investments together. So many times people separate it in their mind between I have my Mexican investments and I have my US investments. But one of a really strategic move for many folks is to have your brokerage account in the US and then have money in Mexico in an interest-bearing account or certificate of deposit, which is perfectly fine and does not violate any of the PFIC rules. And if you notice, the interest rate in Mexico is much higher than the US. As I mentioned before, I highly recommend that you use your US address on the tax return because there's a process called identity verification. Any taxpayer can be sent to identity verification in any year. I have been sent to identity verification myself, and yet my fingerprints are on file with the IRS as a tax preparer. In order to pass this process, basically everything is suspended with your tax account until you can pass the identity verification process. And you're required to get a letter at your home that has a control number on it. So if you have a foreign address, you can see that that's going to cause a delay in being able to get you through the identity verification process. And at that moment, you're unable to change your address because you're already in this process. And so you can't change your address to another US address. And that creates a real problem for people who are in that situation. And especially for people living abroad, because we have no IRS office here in Mexico. If worse comes to worse and you have to go to an IRS office to verify your identity, you would have to do that in the US. Another trap sometimes is relying on the automatic extension. And this comes back to the address, because when you're relying on the automatic 2-month extension from April to June 15th, the IRS looks for something that's foreign on your tax return. It could be foreign interest, it could be the foreign earned income exclusion, or it could be a foreign address. And if you don't have any of that and you're using a US address, they assume that you're not living abroad. So what we recommend is if you're going to be filing after the normal deadline of April 15th or April 18th this year, that you go ahead and file an automatic 6-month extension. For anyone who dies abroad, and even a US citizen, and is a joint tenant in an account, that account can be frozen until a federal transfer certificate is issued. This is something that's very important for spouses to have some bank accounts in his or her own name, so that none of these funds, so that the surviving spouse has access to funds while you get the federal transfer certificate. In many cases, the brokerage firm or bank account does not ask for it, but when they do, this can take up to 6 months for us to get a transfer certificate issued from the IRS. And in the process and in that time, the funds in that account could be frozen. Another thing we see is that people are sent, many times, the brokerage firm or a bank sees a foreign address and they automatically send you a W-8 BEN to fill out. If you fill out a W-8 BEN, this will cause you to get 1042s instead of 1099s, and you are unable to file your tax return electronically until you have that resolved. So anytime you as a US citizen or legal resident receive a W-8 BEN in the mail, you don't need to ask me nor anyone else, nor the person who sent it. You just need to go online, download a W-9, fill it out, and submit it to the bank or brokerage firm that asked for this information from you. The W-9 is nothing more than an attestation of your name, address, and social security number. And some of the banks are now asking for W-9s because the banks in Mexico have certain reporting requirements to the US, and they want to make sure that they have the correct social security number on file. Many people say, yes, but do I have to fill out the W-9 because I've given them my social security number? The difference is, if the bank is, if the IRS comes after the bank for reporting incorrectly a social security number, if they can produce the W-9, it then absolves them of the responsibility because you as the taxpayer have given the number, and therefore they know they are no longer responsible for that reporting if the number was given to them incorrectly. Here on your screen is a W-8 BEN, and I'm not sure if you can see it, but if you look there, it says if you are a US citizen, sorry for the noise, if you're a US citizen or other US person, including a resident alien, that you should use a W-9. So never as a US citizen or as a green card holder, fill out a W-8 BEN. And finally, just a few tips to leave you is that Medicare will require a physical US address, but you can always use a different mailing address for your Social Security. If you have a problem with Social Security and you're unable to resolve that in the US, assuming that you have a US address on that, there is the Social Security Benefit Unit that is available in the US Consulate. If you go to the Guadalajara Consulate webpage, you can make an appointment with the benefit unit and they will call you back. It'll take about 3 weeks, but they will get back in touch with you. And I can tell you from experience that they are highly capable and able to solve many, many problems associated with Social Security. And finally, Social Security, if you're receiving that and you decide to do so, you can have Social Security deposited in a foreign account. However, if you have a refund from the IRS, they will only deposit to a US account. And that's my presentation for today. If I'm not sure, are we going to have questions now, or Ilona, would you like to speak before we have questions?
Mine will be just a few minutes, so I'd like to go
Okay.
ahead now. And then
Okay.
I know most of the questions will be addressed to you, and then people can have time to talk about that with you.
Okay.
Okay, well, Terry is going to go ahead with these. While you see on the screen all these words, I'm sure these are going through your head right now, as they were with the survey that we held last year. The main reason for that is because Americans who live abroad essentially report the U.S. tax policy, which is its intent is to prevent tax evasion and overseas financial crimes, have caused tremendous hardships for those of us in everyday affairs. And my particular favorites in this list of words here are Byzantine, archaic, complicated, unfair, unnecessary. We really are put through the gauntlet when we have to file from abroad. And the principal reason for most of us going abroad are very innocent. You know, we're people who are working abroad, we're raising families abroad, we're students abroad. We have all sorts of very social integrated reasons for being abroad, and we shouldn't be penalized. And so as a task force, we are looking at how to help people with that, to simplify the filing process. Next. So going back, yeah, okay, who we are. I have the honor, we have a wonderful chair. She's just amazing. And we have greatly expanded what is known as the Democrats Abroad Global Taxation Task Force. There's now about 70 of us worldwide who are knowledgeable on US and foreign taxation, legal and financial matters. And I'm on the steering committee, which we meet regularly, global meetings from Australia, from Japan, and from Qatar, you know, all sorts of interesting, Europe, and so on, for strategy development. I represent actually most of Latin America. So I have a particular interest in the retirees who are living in this area, who fall into a different category than most Americans who are working abroad. We work as small teams as well, and I really give enormous kudos to those who are doing the lobbying at congressional level, doing door knocking and the works, strongholding anybody that they can find in an elevator, and they can say, we've got to vote with us. And researching international treaties, policies, and carrying out a lot of social media workshops and special events. You know, as you can see already, you may have seen that we're running specific workshops and seminars on how to fill out some of the forms that Patrick mentioned. And our goal is to help simplify this complicated tax and filing issues and to improve our lives abroad. And with that, of course, is the hope that more citizens voting from overseas will help fix these problems, because we're now, next slide. So we are 9 million people abroad, okay? That's not just Democrats abroad, obviously, but we're 9 million Americans abroad, of which we hope to represent quite a large number of those, because again, many of the people who are working abroad are in teaching, they're in, I was UN, things like that. And so we're very concerned about trying to run our lives and still be a good citizen. So the areas that we're focusing on, these are the campaigns which are particularly important for us, is the issue of the FATCA and the FINESEN FBAR. And the principal reasons for that is because many of us are required to double file and to pay double taxes, of which then you have to go through the process of getting the foreign tax credit. It just means that the process can endure not just a week or two, but can be sometimes months before you feel you have everybody covered and all the papers that need to be filed. That online is now easier, but it was really torturous some years back when I had to do all of this and wait and wait and wait for all those files. So the other is looking at some of the overlap of taxation, which is actually a penalty to us abroad. And the Social Security windfall elimination provision is one of those because it includes, its intent is good. I mean, the idea is to reduce double dipping, to be sure that people aren't getting 2 or 3 pensions and while they, while they should just be receiving one. I mean, I suppose you could put that in the same category as 1 or 2 husbands or wives, but at any rate, with the windfall provision, what it does is it also includes non-US pensions coming from governments or coming from another entity, in my case, a UN, and also benefits that you're receiving abroad. So as a result, people end up having to pay penalty taxes, which is really unfair. So we're looking at all the social justice issues about this. So one of the things that we'd like to propose, which we've been working on, is residency-based taxation. And that's because most of the penalties are involved with citizen-based taxation. We're the only country, we're principally, not the only, but principally the main country in the world where we're based on citizenship for paying taxes as opposed to residency. So we've been advocating for some time that if people are paying taxes in the country that they reside, particularly in the case of people who are long-term abroad, that they should be given an allowance to be able to not have to, in addition, file a tax return in the U.S. It's a hard goal to reach, but we're very hopeful that we can continue to lobby for it. Now, other things that are more practical: exemption from taxation, transition taxes for U.S. owners of small and medium businesses, which is what Patrick was covering earlier. And lest we not forget them, but a number of Americans are born abroad. And those are individuals who grow up in their own countries and they never go to the United States. They never plan to live in the United States. So there's no reason why they should have to be paying taxes to the United States. And they're called accidental Americans. And we are working on helping them be able to renounce their citizenships. And this has become more of a trend in recent years as the penalties increase and other passports become as powerful as the US one. So that's, you may know of some individuals who are involved with that. Next slide. Okay, so going back to the demographics, the one prior to that, Terry. Okay, at any rate, can you go back one slide there? No, two slides back. There you go. Okay, in the survey that we did last year, of which I imagine some of you probably responded to it, and which we want to thank you for having done so. It's really important to look at how many of us are abroad and how many people are interested in having these issues resolved. There were 7,000 responses. Now, where we had a very low response was from Latin America. And I believe this is principally because most of the retirees in this area are not filing. And we have concerns here because, as Patrick had pointed out, the IRS is asking for a return. It's part of our citizenship duty. And therefore, people who are traveling back and forth to the United States might end up having their passport pulled or be questioned as to why they're filing from abroad. But they're not filing from abroad, pardon me. There's also a naivety. A lot of people have stepped out of the US and think it's not required anymore. So we're really working on that particular level of information being addressed to retirees. Yes, if you're receiving only Social Security, you may not be obliged to file, as Patrick had mentioned, but we still, it's still kind of a waffly point. So we want to be sure that that's something that we bring up in all of our advocacy work that we're doing. Now, going on with this particular issue, which is the citizen-based taxation. This is very complicated, and the people are harmed by the way the taxation is worked now. by the complexity of the returns, the requirement to file even when no U.S. taxes are due. For many, this involves double filing, double taxation, also financial accounts abroad, penalty fines on non-U.S. income, as I mentioned before, the Windfall Reduction Act, needing to have a specialized accountant. As charming as Patrick is, we would like to make things easier for people. And the most important thing of all, which some of you may have suffered from in recent years, is the ability to actually access and maintain a financial account abroad. And this is important because while some people manage to live for years just taking money out of their ATMs from the US, a number of other people are required to actually have their employment checks deposited into a foreign account, having their money has to be paid, the taxes have to be paid out of that account. All of this is for banking transparency, which I do not want anybody to confuse with, again, some sort of additional handicaps that have been placed on us as far as the IRS is concerned. Banking transparency is a hugely important topic, and we're very much in favor, all of us, of making sure that our accounts and that our operations by which we transfer money are as transparent as possible. So I just wanted to mention that as a specific point. Okay, last. Now going on, what can you, whoops, one more back. The reason we have a concern about what can you do, go ahead, next slide. Okay, what can you do to help? The reason is because the government response to all of these issues is woefully inadequate, as our report has summarized. And that is that legislative actions required to remedy most of these issues, which include, but it's not limited to taxing based on residency and source, and exempting all of us from the FATCA reporting and so on and so forth, eliminating double taxation, is because we also need to look at legislation that's coming forth. Each year, there are people who are in the lobbying who assume that because we're fat cats or because we're unpatriotic, because we live abroad, they're making life more difficult. So if you'll go back quickly to that, I want to just point out that, first of all, joining us, it's free. You are helping us. If you'd like to access more information about how to download our tax report, go on to the Democrats Abroad website. Do vote. It is incredibly important for us to have represented constituents here that we can lobby for, and sign up for a tax mailing list if you'd like. Donate as well if you'd like. So that's it for my section. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Ilona. Thank you, Patrick. We are in the home stretch. Now it's question time, and I'm sure there are a flood of questions, but we don't have unlimited time. So we'll more than likely take 2, 3, 4 questions. Okay. And just please call out who you want to ask the question of, Patrick or Ilona.
Okay. Terry, I had one to come across on the chat regarding the federal transfer certificate. This is apparently, in order to request the transfer certificate, we have to send a statement of all assets, both foreign and domestic, to the IRS. And we have to get a response back from the IRS that they have released any transfer of assets in the US. This particular certificate, once requested, takes about 6 to 9 months to get. And so while you can read about this online, the bottom line is that you and your spouse should have a separate account and should have money in your own names, so that in the event of a death abroad, you would have time to get the transfer certificate and make the changes to any accounts that were in both names without causing a financial hardship.
Hey, Patrick, you're talking, but I'm not hearing anything at my end.
Okay.
Now you're back for me.
Okay. So the bottom line when it comes to the federal transfer certificate is it represents a delay in getting all accounts in the US transferred from one spouse to the other. So it's important that each spouse have his or her own bank account and have funds in order to be able to live while these issues are being straightened out after the death of a spouse.
And we lost you again, Patrick. So,
Oh, I'm hearing him just fine. It's
fantastic. I'm not.
just his, it's his video.
Okay.
Oh, he's back for me. Okay.
One question that just came over said, can I speak in more detail about Mexican investment interests, instruments to avoid? So the things that you want to avoid in Mexico are mutual funds. And this is where your investments are pooled in different, invested in different companies. And the problem is, because it's a Mexican corporation that's doing the investing, you cannot be sure that you're reporting the correct income on your tax return. Therefore, you're violating the PFIC rules. So I would suggest strongly that all of your investments in Mexico should be CDs, should be bonds, or should be stocks that are purchased directly. So in other words, instead of owning this mutual fund, you may be owning shares of Bimbo, or maybe shares of Coca-Cola Mexico. That would be fine.
All right,
So
John. Okay, I'll go ahead.
So
ahead, Michelle.
any investments that Intercam or Bancomer offer, those are fine?
If it's not a mutual fund, but the thing is, if you're receiving dividends from an investment and you're not sure of the companies that you're invested in, you're probably in a mutual fund.
Because they call them inversions, or
Yes.
inversion is good or bad?
That would probably violate the PFIC rules. Yes,
Oh,
yes.
Now, I think, excuse me, I think you mean inversión. That's
Yes,
just
that.
investment. No, that's not the same.
so
What's
If
the
there,
difference?
put it, let me put it this way. If there is a possibility that your investment can lose value, then you are probably invested in a mutual fund, and that may violate the PFIC rules.
Right.
If you're in a,
What Intercam is offering are things like banknotes, CD, CD, certificates of deposit. I believe those are okay, right, Patrick?
those are okay, yes.
Yeah.
okay, all right. So if they say X amount of time at this interest, this is what you get, then you're safe.
That's correct.
Thank you.
All right, so next question from John. I'll just read it quickly. I'm glad to know that the tax treaty protects activity from Roth and IRA, activity from Roth and IRA accounts from SAT. What about a regular US based brokerage account that generates 35,000, I assume that's dollars, of dividends and interest? Taxpayer resides in Mexico more than 11 months per calendar year and only 2 weeks in the US. Is there a filing obligation for Mexico for the $35,000?
So this is where Mexico has been very lenient with US taxpayers. I would tell you that I would not file a Mexican tax return because all of your income is coming from the US. A Mexican accountant may take a different tact on that and say, well, you're a resident, so therefore that income is going to be taxed here in Mexico. The problem with that is that even for people who would like to fulfill their tax obligations in Mexico, you could be end up paying a lot more tax than you would in the US. And so honestly, I advise people like that just to not get involved in the Mexican tax system.
But if you have a rental in Mexico, you should get involved in the tax system, right?
Yes, that can complicate a little things even further. I would not say that you should necessarily disclose all of your income, but you should be disclosing the income because that was derived from Mexican sources.
All right.
All right, any more questions before we wrap up?
I guess I'm just, if you die abroad, what, you have to get a federal transfer certificate? Why can't it just be like, well, with Vanguard, and if I die, it goes to my husband? It's already set up that way.
It's already set up that way, but if the brokerage firm decides that they need a federal transfer certificate, then you have to get one from the IRS.
Never heard of it or knew about it. Okay,
Yes.
because they have it all set up with beneficiaries, and when you die, this goes here and stuff.
Right. And a beneficiary, it does not affect the beneficiary. And the other thing is, if you have an executor that is in the US, then you would not need a transfer certificate.
Great, thank you.
Just
That
as a
makes it
last
simple.
note, for those who don't know, that you need to have two different wills, one for any Mexican assets and one for the US assets.
That may
Patrick?
be a different
It is,
presentation.
but it's just that a lot of people aren't aware that each country manages its own mortar and brick, shall we say. So if they're financial assets, they're liquid assets, you can cover those under a will. But you have, for instance, the closure of a bank here. You have to have something in the will here that allows you to close out a Mexican bank. Correct, Patrick? That's my understanding.
One thing that I would do is I would make sure that your will in the US mentions your will in Mexico
Yeah.
and vice versa.
Right.
Yes.
And again, if you have two nationalities, if you're a dual citizen, the same thing, both should indicate that you have dual citizenship.
And let me just quickly answer Deb's question. Your assets here could be included in the total value of your assets upon death, but it's unlikely that they would be taxed by the US.
All right.
Okay.
We're
Can you
going to
put
get-
that last slide back up of mine, which has the report, the tax report on there? There you go. Thank you. Please note that again, everyone. All you have to do is go to Democrats Abroad, look for tax. You'll find out what the report, all of the various courses that are being offered, online workshops and so on and so forth, and sign up and become a member if you're not already.
And keep in mind, we're going to send the slides out to everyone we have an email address for, and that's almost everybody. There's a couple of folks who I didn't get one for, but at least not in the current chat. All right, I just want to say thank you all again. I'm Terry, if I didn't say that before, and I don't think I did. I am the outgoing chair. We have an election going on, so please vote if you haven't already in the Democrats Abroad Lake Chapala election. And then I also wanted to say, besides thank you for attending and your flexibility with our tech challenges, here's how you can in fact join Democrats Abroad. But again, this will be in the slides. You go to democratsabroad.org, join. We also do a lot of events in this chapter, probably the most in any chapter in the country. And so if you want to find out about other events, democratsabroad.org/mex_ just one events. That's the shortest web link we can provide to you. And last but not least, if you'd like to donate, the easiest way is to simply send an email to us, votelakechapala@gmail.org. We will send you a simple link on how to do that. We're not going to burden you with the the direct one. So I want to thank everyone again for being here and for being such a great, I don't know if we're an audience when we're talking about taxes, but such a great group. Enjoyed having you here, and we're going to sign off unless there's any final thoughts from anybody. Okay.
Yes, thanks a lot, Terry, for organizing.
Thank you.
A lot
Yes,
of
thank
things.
you, Terry.
All
Yes.
right.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
everyone,
All right,
for
bye-bye.
coming.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.